Section 56 of Armadale. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Armadale by Wilkie Collins. Book the Fourth, Chapter 3, continued. We agreed on a form of letter, which I wrote, and which he copied on the spot. I entered into no particulars at starting. I simply asserted that I was the widow of the deceased Mr. Armadale, that I had been privately married to him, that I had returned to England on his sailing in the yacht from Naples, and that I begged to enclose a copy of my marriage certificate as a matter of form, with which I presumed it was customary to comply. The letter was addressed to the representatives of the late Allan Armadale, Esquire, Thorpe Ambrose, Norfolk, and the doctor himself carried it away and put it in the post. I am not so excited and so impatient for results as I expected to be, now that the first step is taken. The thought of Midwinter haunts me like a ghost. I have been writing to him again, as before, to keep up appearances. It will be my last letter, I think. My courage feels shaken, my spirits get depressed, when my thoughts go back to Turin. I am no more capable of facing the consideration of Midwinter at this moment than I was in the bygone time. The day of reckoning with him, once distant and doubtful, is a day that may come to me now, I know not how soon. And here I am, trusting myself blindly to the chapter of accidents still. November 25th. At 2 o'clock today the doctor called again by appointment. He had been to his lawyers, of course without taking them into our confidence, to put the case simply of proving my marriage. The result confirms what he had already told me. The pivot on which the whole matter will turn, if my claim is disputed, will be the question of identity, and it may be necessary for the witness to make his declaration in the magistrate's presence before the week is out. In this position of affairs, the doctor thinks it important that we should be within easy reach of each other, and proposes to find a quiet lodging for me in his neighborhood. I am quite willing to go anywhere, for, among the other strange fancies that have got possession of me, I have an idea that I shall feel more completely lost to Midwinter if I move out of the neighborhood in which his letters are addressed to me. I was awake and thinking of him again last night. This morning I have finally decided to write to him no more. After staying half an hour, the doctor left me, having first inquired whether I would like to accompany him to Hampstead to look for lodgings. I informed him that I had some business of my own which would keep me in London. He inquired what the business was. "You will see," I said, "tomorrow or the next day." I had a moment's nervous trembling when I was left by myself again. My business in London, besides being a serious business in a woman's eyes, took my mind back to Midwinter in spite of me. The prospect of removing to my new lodging had reminded me of the necessity of dressing in my new character. The time had come now for getting my widow's weeds. My first proceeding, after putting my bonnet on, was to provide myself with money. I got what I wanted to fit me out for the character of Armadale's widow by nothing less than the sale of Armadale's own present to me on my marriage, the ruby ring. It proved to be a more valuable jewel than I had supposed. I am likely to be spared all money anxieties for some time to come. On leaving the jeweller's, I went to the great mourning shop in Regent Street. In 24 hours, if I can give them no more, they have engaged to dress me in my widow's costume from head to foot. I had another feverish moment when I left the shop, and, by way of further excitement on this agitating day, I found a surprise in store for me on my return to the hotel. An elderly gentleman was announced to be waiting to see me. I opened my sitting room door, and there was old Bashwood. He had got my letter that morning, and had started for London by the next train to answer it in person. I had expected a great deal from him, but I had certainly not expected that. It flattered me. For the moment, I declare it flattered me. I pass over the wretched creature's raptures and reproaches, and groans and tears, and weary long prosings about the lonely months he had passed at Thorpe Ambrose, brooding over my desertion of him. He was quite eloquent at times, but I don't want his eloquence here. It is needless to say that I put myself right with him, and consulted his feelings before I asked him for his news. What a blessing a woman's vanity is sometimes! I almost forgot my risks and responsibilities in my anxieties to be charming. For a minute or two I felt a warm little flutter of triumph. And it was a triumph, even with an old man. In a quarter of an hour I had him smirking and smiling, hanging on my lightest words in ecstasy, and answering all the questions I put to him like a good little child. Here is his account of affairs at Thorpe Ambrose, as I gently extracted it from him, bit by bit. In the first place, the news of Armadale's death has reached Miss Milroy. It has so completely overwhelmed her that her father has been compelled to remove her from the school. She is back at the cottage, and the doctor is in daily attendance. Do I pity her? Yes, I pity her exactly as much as she once pitied me. In the next place, the state of affairs at the great house, which I expected to find some difficulty in comprehending, turns out to be quite intelligible, and certainly not discouraging so far. Only yesterday the lawyers on both sides came to an understanding. Mr. Darch, the family solicitor of the Blanchards, and Armadale's bitter enemy in past times, represents the interests of Miss Blanchard, who, in the absence of any male heir, is next heir to the estate, and who has, it appears, been in London for some time past. Mr. Smart, of Norwich, originally employed to overlook Bashwood, represents the deceased Armadale. And this is what the two lawyers have settled between them. Mr. Darch, acting for Miss Blanchard, has claimed the possession of the estate, and the right of receiving the rents at the Christmas audit, in her name. Mr. Smart, on his side, has admitted that there is great weight in the family solicitor's application. He cannot see his way, as things are now, to contesting the question of Armadale's death, and he will consent to offer no resistance to the application if Mr. Darch will consent, on his side, to assume the responsibility of taking possession in Miss Blanchard's name. This Mr. Darch has already done, and the estate is now virtually in Miss Blanchard's possession. One result of this course of proceedings will be, as Bashwood thinks, to put Mr. Darch in the position of the person who really decides on my claim to the widow's place and the widow's money. The income being charged on the estate, it must come out of Miss Blanchard's pocket, and the question of paying it would appear, therefore, to be a question for Miss Blanchard's lawyer. Tomorrow will probably decide whether this view is the right one, for my letter to Armadale's representatives will have been delivered at the great house this morning. So much for what old Bashwood had to tell me. Having recovered my influence over him, and possessed myself of all his information so far, the next thing to consider was the right use to turn him to in the future. He was entirely at my disposal, for his place at the steward's office has been already taken by Miss Blanchard's man of business, and he pleaded hard to be allowed to stay and serve my interests in London. There would not have been the least danger in letting him stay, for I had, as a matter of course, left him undisturbed in his conviction that I really am the widow of Armadale of Thorpe Ambrose. But with the doctor's resources at my command, I wanted no assistance of any sort in London, and it occurred to me that I might make Bashwood more useful by sending him back to Norfolk to watch events there in my interests. He looked sorely disappointed, having had an eye evidently to paying his court to me in my widowed condition, when I told him of the conclusion at which I had arrived. But a few words of persuasion, and a modest hint that he might cherish hopes in the future if he served me obediently in the present, did wonders in reconciling him to the necessity of meeting my wishes. He asked helplessly for instructions when it was time for him to leave me and travel back by the evening train. I could give him none, for I had no idea as yet what the legal people might or might not do. "But suppose something happens," he persisted, "that I don't understand? What am I to do, so far away from you?" I could only give him one answer. "Do nothing," I said. "Whatever it is, hold your tongue about it, and write or come up to London immediately to consult me." With those parting directions, and with an understanding that we were to correspond regularly,